As the US maintains the pressure on Iran, tension is on the rise in the Gulf, raising concerns of a full-blown military confrontation. The Trump administration is seeking an international coalition to secure the Strait of Hormuz, which is one of the most important shipping routes in the world. But Iran is skeptical. Tehran has dismissed the naval build-up as a move that might destabilize the whole region and is calling for US vessels to leave the area.
America will not be held hostage to nuclear blackmail.
The crisis all started when President Donald Trump unilaterally pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal last year and reinstated sanctions targeting Tehran and countries that trade with it. The EU is still sticking to the deal, offering a mechanism to bypass US sanctions. But today, on Talk to Al Jazeera, Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Zarif warns while his country remains committed to the landmark 2015 nuclear deal, its patience is running out.
Mr. Foreign Minister, I would like to start by asking you about the latest developments, the naval buildup in the area as the US seeks to build an international coalition to guarantee freedom of navigation in the area. How do you see it?
Well, this is a tiny body of water, and the more foreign naval vessels you have in this body of water, the less secure it is for everybody. Based on experience, presence of the United States and foreign naval fleets in the Persian Gulf has never produced security. We have all very sad memories of US ships downing an Iranian airliner in 1988, killing 290 passengers. So we believe that the best US can do for protection of maritime navigation is to just leave people alone. Don't interfere. This is basically a hostile act against Iran, and I do not believe it will have any impact other than insecurity. We have the longest coast on the Persian Gulf and on the Sea of Oman and the Strait of Hormuz. And we have historically maintained freedom of navigation and security in the region, along with our neighbors. And once again, we call on our neighbors to come together for security. Don't go outside to buy security. We do not need to quarrel with each other. You do not need to suffocate Qatar in order to have security. You do not need to align yourself with Israel in order to have security. The best way to have security is to come together, and we are ready for that.
But when you see the string of events that took place in the body of water over the last few months, you have drones downed, you have oil tankers mysteriously attacked, which is now putting more pressure on the international community, on the Americans in particular, to say, you know what, it's about time to take action.
No, it's about time to stop terrorizing Iranian people. It's about time to stop creating insecurity in the region. And I think doing that will provide security. I think the United States is the source of instability in this region. I think US allies, unfortunately, have been the source of instability. Who is bombing people in Yemen? Who are fighting in Aden together? Is Iran involved? Or are friends involved? Or are these two allies of the United States fighting against each other? These are the sources of instability in our region. So it's best for the United States to leave this region alone, allow countries in this region to come together to provide security for each other. Iran has announced time and again, starting probably in 1985, but recently, when I became foreign minister 6 years ago, I called for a regional dialogue forum. That offer is still on the table. I also called for non-aggression pact among countries in the region. That offer is still on the table. So I call on the countries in the region. This is Eid al-Adha. I congratulate everybody. This is the Eid of sacrifice. We need to sacrifice our pride for the security of our people. And I think it is the best time to start.
Iran's defense minister Amir Tahir warned against any attempt by the Israelis to step into this and join the US-led coalition, saying that this could have, this is his words, disastrous consequences. Is Iran trying to draw a line in the sand here?
Well, we basically state our position. Israel has been the source of instability and insecurity and aggression and war in this region. It is very unfortunate that some countries in our region are trying to buy security of all people from Israel. People who have not been able to provide security for themselves. Their Iron Dome has not even been able to protect them against organizations that are fighting for their independence. How can they provide security for the countries in the region? I think our neighbors are looking at the wrong place. Israel has been a source of disgrace for this region. Israel has been the biggest threat to the Muslim world, to international peace and security. There are more resolutions against Israeli aggressions coming from a United Nations, a Security Council where the United States holds a veto power. But even this, if the US did not have a veto power in the Security Council, we would have thousands of resolutions against Israel. But even with US veto, we have tens of resolutions against Israel from many UN bodies. So it's time for all of us to wake up to the fact that friendship with Israel will never provide anybody any security. It will only exacerbate tension and basically hatred of the Muslim people.
But aren't you concerned that in this particular context, the potential for a full-blown military confrontation is almost there? Because the Americans are saying, for example, that the Revolutionary Guard in Iran is using GPS interference to lure oil tankers into wandering into the territorial waters of Iran to seize them. And, you know, a slight, small incident there, and there you go. It could be war.
Well, obviously, we are protecting our shores. We are protecting our waters. It is close to us, and it is 7,000 miles away from their shores. Now, who should be concerned? I believe the presence of the United States in this region is destabilizing, and if they're concerned about instability, they should move away. What is very clear, extremely clear, is that we're not seeking war. We do not want confrontation. We want development for our people. We want development for our region. We depend on this region. We depend on the Persian Gulf, on the Strait of Hormuz. It's our lifeline. All of our oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz. We need stability here, but stability should be for everybody. We cannot have stability for some and instability for others. We need to have stability for all countries in the region, and we are prepared to protect stability for all countries in the region and for those who depend on our region. The United States is least dependent for its energy on this region. It is China, it is Japan, it is Korea. I think those are the countries who should be involved with us, with the countries in the region, not with people who are from outside the region. And we're prepared to work with them to ensure security and stability in this region.
The Americans have vessels in the region, so and the British also, but Germany and France seems to have decided to stay away from this international coalition. How do you see it? Is it a positive signal?
I think it's an important signal that the United States is getting more and more isolated, not because of anything we have done, but because of what they are doing. They're violating the law, they're breaking the law, they're breaking every international treaty that they've been a member of. They have broken not only the nuclear deal with Iran, but the Paris Convention, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, everything, basically everything they could break, they are breaking it. So they're the source of instability globally, and this type of behavior will lead to further global disorder. And I think that is dangerous for everybody, and everybody is realizing that. Of course, the United States has great economic power, but sooner or later people will decide, countries will decide to move away from the dependence, total dependence on US dollar. I believe the United States, by weaponizing its economy, by weaponizing the US dollar, is reducing global dependence on US dollar. And at the end of the day, it will not happen tomorrow. It will not happen in the short term. But the policy that the Trump administration is following, vis-a-vis sanctions, vis-a-vis imposition of tariffs, vis-a-vis breaking all sorts of international regulations on trade, will lead to the less and less predominance of dollar in global markets.
You've just mentioned the US sanctions targeting Iran's oil sales. And we're starting to see some of its impact on your economy, which is contracting by something like 6%, and inflation is predicted to hover around something like 37%. Do you have any other options in the future to circumvent the sanctions?
Well, first of all, it's not sanctions, because sanctions are supposed to implement, to enforce laws. These are means of warfare. In fact, economic terrorism, because there are no laws that they are enforcing. The United Nations, in fact, the Security Council has ordered countries to normalize their economic relations with Iran. So they're breaking the law and they're punishing people who want to uphold the law. So we don't call them sanctions, we call them economic terrorism, economic warfare. And as long as economic warfare continues, there won't be stability. But we will adapt ourselves to the new situation. Most of the impact of the sanctions occurred last year when our economy faced a shock. Now we are stabilizing. We have been able to increase our growth. Now we are in the positive territory in terms of growth. Inflation is coming down. It is still bad. The Americans are targeting innocent civilians. It is our job in the government of Iran to protect our civilians. And we may not be doing the best job possible, but we are trying and we will do better. And then the United States will come and complain why Iran found ways of addressing these. Because everything that we are doing today is because the United States tried to prohibit us. We are developing our own defense because the United States didn't allow us to get means of defense during the aggression by Saddam Hussein against us. Now we developed our missiles and they are complaining now. They didn't complain when Saddam Hussein was showering our cities with missiles, but they're complaining now. They deprived us of the fuel that we needed for the American-built Tehran research reactor. We built our own fuel and then they complained that they want to build a bomb.
I think one of the reasons, Mr. Foreign Minister, why they are concerned is, and many other countries are of the view that Iran's biggest problem is that its nuclear ambitions, it's in a pursuit to develop ballistic missile technology. And for many countries, the Americans in particular, this is a red line.
Well, the Americans are not in a position to draw red lines for what we do for our defense. When our people were dying with Iraqi chemical weapons, when our people were being killed by American AWACS information, reconnaissance information, by the British Chieftain tanks, by Soviet MiGs, by French Exocet missiles. Who was protecting us? By German chemical weapons. Who was protecting us? Nobody came to our protection. We were forced to develop our ballistic missiles, our missile capability in order to defend ourselves. That is why this issue is extremely important for Iranian people, because we're not going to allow another aggressor to catch us defenseless. We will defend ourselves. Now, if the United States is serious about this, it should stop selling $50 billion of weapons to our region every year. The United States is not serious. It just wants to complain. The United States is selling billions, 50 billion last year, sold $50 billion of weapons to this region. Some of the countries in this region, with less than a third of our population, spend $87 billion on just military procurement. Let's just compare. Iran spent last year $16 billion on all of its military, with almost 1 million people under arms. We paid $16 billion. The United Arab Emirates, with a total 1 million population, indigenous population, spent $22 billion. Saudi Arabia spent $87 billion. Now, if we're talking about threats coming from countries in the region, the threat is coming from the United States and its Western allies who are pouring weapons into this region, making it a tinderbox, ready to blow up.
But don't you see that sometimes your neighbors, particularly Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, your neighbors in the region, the moment they see that you're determined to build your own military capabilities, they would say, we also have to do the same thing. We need to protect ourselves because this is an area that could be explosive in any time.
We were not building our military capabilities when they paid $75 billion to Saddam Hussein to attack us. Saudi Arabia, based on their own statements, paid $75 billion for Saddam's armaments. It turned out that Saddam, after not being able to defeat us in the war, targeted those weapons against the Saudis and the Kuwaitis themselves. So if they started a military arms race, an arms buildup in this region, they should not complain. We're not engaged in an arms buildup. We are engaged in creating the necessary capability to defend ourselves. Are they prepared to bring their military expenditure to our level? We spend $16 billion. If Saudi Arabia is serious, at least they can spend double our amount, $32 billion. Let me challenge them. Instead of $87 billion that they spent last year, they have half of our population, less than half of our population, spend twice as much as we spend on defense. Why are they complaining? What is it that they're complaining about? They're buying the most sophisticated weapons from the United States. They're buying the most sophisticated weapons that are available in the global market. And unfortunately, the merchants of death are selling them those weapons.
We'll go back to your relations with your neighbors in the region. It seems that we are in a perfect impasse. And at the very heart of this whole crisis is the landmark 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA. Can it still hold, Mr. Foreign Minister?
I believe so. I believe it's the best deal that was possible. It wasn't the best deal for everybody because you cannot have a perfect deal. There is no perfect deal. It was the best deal that was possible. And if President Trump is given correct advice, he will be able to basically accept the reality that this is the best deal possible and we can move forward. But the deal can go on if the other participants, if the remaining participants in the deal decide to simply fulfill their commitments. We don't expect them to do anything for us. All we want from them is to fulfill their own commitments, the commitments they made in the deal and the commitments they made after the US withdrawal. If they believe the commitments they made in the deal was contingent upon US being a part of the deal, what about the commitments that they made after they knew that US had withdrawn? What we want them to do and what we expect them to do is to stay committed, and we will stay committed as long as they are.
You know, the Europeans are coming under mounting pressure from the United States of America, and this is what they are offering so far. I mean, this is the situation as it stands now. They say that the best way out from this particular crisis is the INSTEX, which is the instrument in support for the trade exchanges, the framework that was established by the EU to circumvent the US sanctions for their own companies to do business with Iran. Do you find it an ideal framework?
Well, it's not certainly an ideal framework. It's a prerequisite from their point of view for their 11 commitments that they made since US withdrawal. And they haven't been able to implement it. As you know, the amount of bullying by the United States is so much that that before INSTEX has become operational, 2 of its managing directors have withdrawn. It's because of the US arm twisting behind the scene.
Now the Europeans at the same time are saying that we're expecting the Iranians to give us more signals that they are willing to engage. I'll give you an example. You said that you've issued warnings that you might remove some of the restraints when it comes to the nuclear deal, particularly when it comes to enriching uranium beyond the threshold of 3.67%. Is that still the case? Are you determined to go forward?
Well, you see, when we negotiated the nuclear deal, it was not based on trust. It was based on mutual mistrust. And that is why in the deal we have provided provisions, remedies, if one side or the other violates the deal. We are using that exact remedy in paragraph 36 of the nuclear deal. So we're not violating the deal, we are implementing the deal, we are trying to safeguard the deal. I can make a general statement for you. We will be committed to the JCPOA as much as and as long as Europe and the rest of the participants are committed. And I can give you one more. We will be even more committed than they are.
President Trump has repeatedly said the 2015 nuclear deal was a bad deal. And if he decides it's a turned chapter, what would be the options left for Iran?
Well, you see, everybody can find faults in the deal. There are a lot of people in Iran who are as opposed to the JCPOA, or maybe more opposed to the JCPOA than President Trump is, because no deal is perfect. There were a lot of demands that we had that have not been met in the deal, and certainly a lot of demands that the US had that have not been met in the deal. But a deal is a deal. It is an agreement. It's an agreement that a US government, a US president elected by the people endorsed. We did not have a revolution in the United States. We just had an election. And it cannot simply say that the agreements of previous administrations do not hold. So if we take this statement seriously, there are 2 years left of the first term of President Trump, less than 2 years left. And then we will have a new president, or maybe President Trump re-elected.
So it's then that you will decide how to move on?
No. Even if President Trump is there for another 6 years, are we supposed to reach another deal with President Trump that can only last 6 years? That can only last 5 years? That can only last a year and a half? Is that the type of international environment that President Trump wants to create for people, for countries who want to engage with the United States? That you can rely on a deal as long as the president is in office. Now, let me answer myself on his behalf. He says, I'll take this deal to Congress and have it ratified. He just withdrew from a treaty that had been ratified by Congress, the INF treaty with Russia. That had been ratified by Congress. In a few days, he'll be withdrawing from a treaty with Iran that had been ratified by Congress in 1955. He is the first president that decided to withdraw from that treaty after the United States used that treaty in the ICJ several times. So this is the type of administration we are dealing with. It's not the excuse that this was an executive agreement.
I see your rationale. From your own perspective, the bottom line here is, do you have any deadline? Like, in 2 years from now, if there is no attempt for any genuine renegotiation of the deal, we're going to pull out from the deal.
We don't need to pull out from the deal. As long as others are in the deal, we will be in the deal. But we have options within the deal, because as I said, this deal was negotiated based on mutual mistrust and even distrust. And that is why we have put mechanisms in the deal, in the JCPOA, to make sure that the deal would outlast any violation.
As the diplomatic crisis unfolds, your neighbors in the region are pretty much concerned. Saudi Arabia in particular. And for this, I would like to ask you, how would you describe now your relations with the Saudis?
Well, not good. But Saudi's relations with Qatar are not good. Now, I don't know what's happening to their relations with the UAE in Aden. Of course, we're happy that there is a ceasefire in Aden, but there's been conflict. The situation in Libya, the situation in the Sudan, all of these are where they are involved. We're not involved in Libya or the Sudan, but they are involved, unfortunately. What we have called for and repeat is that our neighbors, all of us, belong to this region. We cannot leave this region. Others will leave this region. Others will not secure us. Others will not provide us with the security umbrella that we need. We can provide each other with that security umbrella. We extend our hand. and our hand remain extended to all our neighbors. We are very happy that we have extremely good relations with Qatar. We have extremely good relations with Oman. We have extremely good relations with Kuwait. And we want to have good relations with the other three countries in the Persian
But you know what the Saudis and the Emiratis, for example, have been saying over the last few years? That Iran has never been genuine about reaching out to us. And they would give you examples. They would say, you are spreading a radical ideology in the region. You use proxies in Yemen, for example. You are building the capabilities of the Houthis to destabilize the region. You've been involved militarily in a place like Syria. When you should have come to them and looked into different scenarios, like a diplomatic way out of the crisis there.
Let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
Are our proxies fighting each other in Aden? Are our proxies fighting each other in Libya? Are our proxies fighting each other in the Sudan? Did we provide $75 billion to Saddam Hussein? Did we imprison the prime minister of another country for 3 weeks? Who has done all of this? We have been on the receiving end of their aggressions, of the money they spent in order to destabilize us. From day one after the revolution, they were hoping to undermine the revolution. They have not succeeded. Isn't 40 years enough? Isn't 40 years long enough for them to come to their senses that by paying terrorist organizations, by financing terrorist organizations, by financing aggressors, they're only creating enemies for themselves? Look at what they've done in Syria. They financed Daesh, they armed Daesh, they armed the Nusra. What did it do to them?
But at the same time, they would say, you could have also stepped in its place like Syria, where you have a huge political and military leverage, and convince President Bashar al-Assad to negotiate a peaceful way out of the crisis.
That's exactly
with the Syrian people.
That's exactly what we're doing.
Look at the situation in Syria.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, but that's exactly what we're doing. That's exactly what we have done with Russia and Turkey for the last 3 years. That's exactly what we're doing. But they came to Syria not to unseat President Bashar al-Assad, but to push us out. They have to recognize that Iran cannot be excluded from this region. We're a part of this region. We are a part and parcel. We have been here for millennia. We have 7,000 years of history in this region. We did not come from outside, unlike others. We are from this region, we will remain in this region, and that's a historical fact. We need to live together. We want to live with our neighbors. We have no choice, but we have serious bonds. We have historical bonds, cultural bonds, religious bonds, and as all Muslims are coming back from Mina to finish their Hajj, we call on our neighbors to come back to what joins us together, rather than to what pulls us apart.
Yemen, for example, you have good relations with the Houthis. On this particular issue, how can you step in and offer a way out of this crisis in Yemen? You could talk to the Houthis and convince the Houthis.
Actually, in April 2015, few days after the war had started, we offered, at that time, and the United States administration agreed to have a ceasefire. And we offered our help. Unfortunately, Saudi Arabia at that time believed that it could win militarily within weeks. That is why it rejected the offer. Our offer is still on the table. Ceasefire, immediate humanitarian assistance, Yemeni, intra-Yemeni dialogue, and an inclusive government. That offer is still on the table. They should stop fighting. They should stop fighting each other. They should stop putting all this burden on the innocent Yemeni people. Allow Yemenis to come to the negotiating table, and I can assure you, we will do whatever we can in order to make that happen.
There's been a meeting between senior Iranian official and an Emirati official about maritime security. Do you see this as a first step towards normalization with the United Arab Emirates?
Well, we certainly hope that we can have normalization with all of our neighbors. And we certainly hope that all of our neighbors can have normalization with each other. There is no reason for the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Bahrain to try to strangulate Qatar. and we make it very clear to them. This region is too small and too volatile for these games to be played.
So you're talking about a very complex political landscape in the region, which also brings again the same question. Could these problems that they've been talking about, the blockade imposed on Qatar, your strained relations with the Saudi Arabia and with the United Arab Emirates, the ongoing crisis, could it be a conducive to a genuine debate between you and the Saudis? Because when we face reality, ultimately, Mr. Foreign Minister, the Saudis consider themselves to be the leaders of the Sunni Islam. You consider yourselves to be the leaders of Shia Islam. And people are saying that after all these years, calamities, disasters, civil wars, bloodshed, it's about time for a new chapter.
It's long over. It's long overdue. We need to do it. We're prepared to do it. My proposal for a regional dialogue forum is on the table. That's exactly what you do when you have dialogue. You don't discuss about niceties, you discuss about your differences. And I made that proposal 6 years ago. I restate that proposal. There is a Security Council resolution 598, which was adopted in 1987. It has a paragraph in it based on Iranian suggestion that we need to have a regional security arrangement. We call on our neighbors in the region to join us in trying to secure our region. The problem has been that some in our region, particularly in Saudi Arabia, have believed that they can purchase security from outside, that they can secure themselves by relying on the worst enemy of the Islamic world, and that is Israel. They have done that. They continue to do that. It pains me when I see Netanyahu saying that Saudi leaders are his friends. Netanyahu is never going to be a friend of the Muslim world. His hands are bloodied with the blood of Muslim people. Look at what happens every Friday in the occupied territories. This is the reality of the situation. Why are they relying on Netanyahu?
Since you're talking about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, described the US Middle East plan as a crime against humanity, which prompted a tough response from US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Do you see the Middle East peace plan something that could possibly see the daylight?
I believe the Palestinians are the final judge of that. And if you look at the situation right now, the Palestinians are rejecting that, and they have every reason to reject it, because it basically legitimizes the status quo. This is what they have said publicly. This is what Kushner has said publicly. This is what others have said publicly, that we have to accept reality on the ground. Reality on the ground is aggression. Reality on the ground is occupation. Reality on the ground is annexation. Reality on the ground is violation, daily violation of human rights of all Palestinians. I do not believe that the Palestinians are prepared to accept this reality on the ground, and the US should stop legitimizing aggression, violation of human rights, and occupation.
But it seems that other key players in the region are now pretty much in favor of this deal. They say, let's face it, we have to be very pragmatic, and it's about time to realize that we need to make massive concessions to move forward.
I think the Palestinians will make the final decision. If the Palestinians accept the deal, nobody can prevent them. If the Palestinians reject the deal, nobody can force them. I believe this is humiliation for the Islamic world. I believe this is a disgrace that some in our region are playing a part in it. Palestine is not for sale. People cannot buy. It's not a piece of real estate. In this approach, Al-Quds al-Sharif is becoming a piece of real estate. Well, maybe from the perspective of a real estate developer, this is a piece of real estate, but not for people in this region. This is our holy land.
We'd like to move on to other issues, but there's been some recent developments about the case of Negar Ghodskani, She pleaded guilty to the being part in a conspiracy to evade US sanctions. Your offer is still on the table, the prisoner swap, her release in exchange for the release of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, held in Tehran for spying charges.
Well, I'm not going to go into the details, but this was a lady who had to give birth to a child in hospital, in prison in Australia. And I believe after 2.5, 3 years of waiting in prison, she accepted to be extradited in the United States and engage in a plea bargain. But that's her choice.
You've been sanctioned after declined the Trump chat invitation. Isn't this something that could further impede your work as foreign minister? I mean, would you be able to travel to the US, meet with senators, potentially even meet with President Trump if the circumstances are different?
Well, you see, I'm doing my work. I had the pleasure of meeting my counterpart, and I'll be meeting with His Highness the Emir. I'm interviewing you. So, I mean, in today's world, you cannot shut anybody. You cannot shut them up. You cannot prevent a foreign minister from doing his job. I never request any meetings in the US. I respond to requests. Now, if they continue to make requests from me, I will respond positively.
Why don't you seize the opportunity? People will say that, well, Iran said this was just going to be a photo op with no substance. Who knows? It could be also an opportunity for you to at least listen to the man in person and then see how you can come up with some concessions to move forward.
You see, we're busy people. I spend days and nights negotiating a deal. Why should I spend again the same time if that is going to hold only for 1.5 or 5.5 years?
You said that you are a very busy person. You've been Iran's chief diplomat for almost, I think, 6 years. You've gone through the marathon talks for the landmark 2015 nuclear deal. There's been the Arab Spring, war in Syria, war in Yemen, the ongoing crisis with the Trump administration. Isn't this a tough job for you, Mr. Foreign Minister, trying to build bridges with a world that does not trust Iran?
Well, the mistrust is mutual. Not with the world, with a few countries. And I think the rest of the world don't trust them either. But it's a tough job. But it's a sweet toughness to be trying to serve your people.
This is going to be my last question to you, Mr. Mohammad Zarif, Iran's foreign minister. How do you see the future deep in your heart when you look at the situation? When we see that the next months could be really decisive in the region, do you have any hopes that we might see a peaceful political way out of the crisis with the US? Or are you concerned that the potential for a war is also there?
I'm certainly concerned, but as a diplomat, I always need to look for a peaceful way out, and that's what we are trying.
Mohammad Zarif, Iran's foreign minister, thank you very much indeed for your time.